Now here we continue. Tarragona is pretty small, so from one end of the old town to the other end, just like 10 minutes, so like a handkerchief. And look, here we are facing again the Roman wall that along the Middle Ages especially, they were reinforcing it. Here we have an example of it in the main work of the Roman walls. Then this outcoming towers that you can tell it that is different because the size of the stone. In Roman times they had a pretty large ashlar standard size, while in Middle Ages it was much smaller. Here one of the many remains that they have found in Tarragona from some temples. Look here from a closer view, this shell origin of this type of limestone, this orange one that we can see also here in these ashlars, some of them with this embossage and some others even beaten by the decalcification. Here in the so-called Avenue of the Roman Empire, we have a modern decoration inspired in the mosaic, though the mosaic, as you know, is with little small square pieces, the so-called tesellas, while here is with pebble stones. Look here, making a parenthesis, not anymore from Romance and medieval, but from other times, like 1915, one of the little jewels of Tarragona, a work from Jujol. Jujol was an architect that in his early years of work, as a not yet as an architect, he got the degree a bit, the license a bit later. He was a close ID of Gaudí. He was involved in one of the most famous buildings of Gaudí, like constructions, like the Parkway, that together with the so-called viaduct, a set of walks, two levels, and with these famous leaning columns and some little houses and a kind of Greek temple at the second level. Then, like the center of the park, there is a famous bank. The design of these winding work surfaces like a snake, this kind of undulation, so typical of the Modernisme, the Catalan Art Nouveau, it was Gaudí, but then he gave full freedom to Jujol, the architect who made also this little building in Tarragona attached into the wall, gave full freedom to make the decoration with this technique that is a kind of reloading of the mosaic, the trencadís. So notice how important were the things that the Romans settled like 2000 years ago, because along the centuries it had been renewing or renewal of these techniques or these applied arts. So the mosaics kind of organize and regulate, while the Catalan modern mosaic, let us call it trencadís, it's a kind of abstract work. That some of these greatest pieces of the trencadís they were done by this architect Pujol. Then also he was collaborating for Gaudí in making the very fantastic kind of algae shaped balconies of La Pedrera, one of these fantastic buildings of Gaudí in Barcelona. And then, when he was working by his own as an architect, he was developing a very personal language that is partly inspired by the lessons of Gaudí and this style of the times, this kind of soft, smooth surfaces, this line for the curviness, but also introducing some other elements like the rurality, the Baroque, especially here we can see it by the sgraffiato, this way to cover the surfaces like painted, though there is not painting, is like two layers of sand or plastering and then scratching, you get a kind of negative drawing, and that was already done in Baroque times, and then even incorporating the language and the simplicity, the neatness of the modern architecture that by this time they were developing the Bauhaus, Le Corbusier, and some other architects, Germany, France. Though here still these architects they were very attached to the tradition, and especially one of the greatest beliefs, no, that is Christianism, Catholicism. He was a great master of the broad iron words, not only outside for the balconies, but even here inside, as you can see. I'm very religious. Ave Maria, as you can read there. All over his words, there is always Ave Maria, especially devoted to Mary. Was this architect that also you can see another great work, even greater because a bit bigger and isolated, like a farmhouse, very close from Tarragona. For example, if you go to see the aqueduct, also on the way or after seeing the aqueduct, then you can pass by a village very close to Tarragona called Pallaresos, and there is another very surprising work of Jujol. Notice how he got rid of the frame for the windows or the openings, though he framed it with this kind of painting. And then on the top there is the Son of Mary, J or GHS, Jesus Homine Salvatore, Jesus the Savior of men. Then notice also this trend towards modernity because the building is not really symmetric. On the left hand side there is like a third level, so creating this asymmetry. That is something that in the most conventional buildings they won't have there to do something like this. But well, returning to our main focus, that is the Roman medieval monuments of Tarragona. So we can see here one of the entrances into the town. We began by the other entrance, San Antoni, that is El Portal del Roser, the gate of the Virgin Mary of the Rosary, Roser. You can clearly see there the entrance. That is also, it was also repaired and remade partially in modern times, well, by 16th, 17th century. Notice the difference. There are two kinds of wall. The one that is standing straight, like vertical, and the other one with a 10-degree slightly. That's because the left-hand one that was attached by 17th century, it's a modern technique to make the walls. By the Renaissance, they realized that in order to stand the bombing, it was better not to make very high and thick, perfectly vertical walls, but it was even more convenient to make a baluard system, and especially with leaning walls, and then in between some kind of terraces, and then a counter wall, these polygonal shaped walls with the right leaning in order to support better the bombing that it was increasingly being more powerful. Look again the difference in between the baseboard with this monolith, some of them really huge, like 2 meters wide, and of a different color of the rest of the wall with a more common opus quadratum, so tertiary, or even the Mesozoic from the time of the dinosaurs. The lower part and the upper part is a younger, also limestone. That's why in the upper part you still can see some shells and fossils, but different in the lower part that is much older limestone, as it was more time to be under pressure, compactation, and some thermic conditions. These fossils and shells they have been recrystallized, and the trace or the look of the fossil is gone. And then so we can see these patches of calcite in between the rest of the limestone that is not that crystallized as the calcite. As we were commenting, because the carbonic acid that there is in the air, and sometimes also because Tarragona there is this petrochemical, even some pollutants in the air, they even increase the damage into the stone, and until they find the right way to restore, so they place a net. Not really because big stones might fall, but some little stone that can be inconvenient. And look the width of the wall, like 4 meters wide. And then as on the outer part, also in the inner part, the so-called intramuros street, there were attached also some buildings, some flats. Some of them, like where we are focusing right now, from the Roman times. Some parts of the wall is also reinforced with batteries, as you can see over there. And here, as we were focusing, some buildings of the administration of the Romans. You can imagine that in a town with permanent legions sometimes, or some other legions that they were sent to the still unconquered parts of the Iberian Peninsula. So they had to pay many salaries, and it was many people working for the administration or the supplies for the army or the tax collection, all these duties or the reparation of roads or the reparation of the ports or the enlargement of ports or making an aqueduct, all these matters, they require not only slaves and workers and some engineers and soldiers, but clerks to write down all the things for the products or for the taxation, the payment, and that's why beyond temples, amphitheaters, circus, the most famous Roman buildings also in all the important Roman towns, together with insulas like flats and domus, bigger house for the patrician, the rich people, there were also administrative buildings, like for offices. And then also look this poster over there, Tarragona. By May, you can check it by your when you are preparing your visit. You can check some things like, for example, when they are doing human towers or when they are doing this Tarragona, because if you can shot two birds from one, you can kill two birds from one shot, so the better. And for a week or a couple of weeks, they do like recreations of what happened in the Roman times, like what did they eat, how did they fight in the amphitheater, how did they dance, many other things. Well, here is the map of Tarragona. Obviously, not just invented, but based on many remains that they have found sometimes, like still standing, so they can draw the perimeter, and then they know how was the facade or even how was the roof. And some other times, because when, for example, they are preparing the foundations for a modern building, then almost always they found something on the underground Roman remains. So then they come the archaeologians, and so from 1 meter high wall, sometimes it's nothing spectacular, but already something very telling about the spaces that it was occupying. Here a big house, here a depot, and so on. So after many decades, even more than 150 years by now of relatively scientific, serious research on the Roman remains and the meaning of Tarragona as capital of the Tarraconensis or the Hispania Superior, this massive northern province of Hispania. They know pretty well how did it look, Tarragona. A town that maybe had roughly like 30,000 inhabitants, we don't know for sure. What is pretty clear is that they were two quite well differentiated towns. Obviously, together with outside of the town, the rurality and the city itself. Urbs, Tarraco, Colonia, Julia, Urbs, Triumphalis. The Romans, they were not giving these suffixes and prefixes just like this. They meant very clear things. Colonia, so was the highest status of a place where the people that they came from Rome or from Italy, from Lazio, the central part of the Italian peninsula, they came here as settlers, and even the locals, they also got the rights of citizens. First, it was applied the Latin law, that was like a second rank in comparison to the Roman law, and then it was given the right to have and to enjoy the Roman law that had things, for example, the right to open a shop, or the right to travel, the right not to be tortured, and some other things. While, for example, if you were a municipia, you had less rights, and if you were an oppidum, so they didn't apply you the Roman law. You were under in the Roman Empire, but you were like absolutely second category citizen. Then Julian, probably that was an honorary title given by a very same Julius Caesar that was here in a campaign in an important battle against Pompey in Lleida, nowadays a Catalan town. Then also an important Roman city, Urbs. So city made of settlers, Colonia, and Urbs, like big city, and Triumphalis. That is also probably in relation with Julius Caesar and his adopted son, Augustus. So to carry this name, it was like such a presentation into the Roman world. If you were, for example, a senator coming from Tarragona, and you met your colleagues there, so you said, yeah, I am from Tarragona, Colonia, Julia, Urbs, Triumphalis. And the people say, well, that's really very important. So the government and the way Rome represents itself with big buildings and this publica magnificencia. So in architecture, there is this term that when you want to impress locals and foreigners, so you make big buildings, and it was all in the upper part. While you can see it's these empty areas and these two temples, probably one dedicated to the Triada Capitolina, so the Zeus, Hera, and Minerva, that would be the equivalent to Athena from Athens. And then the other temple is not for sure, that probably the historians they believe that there were two temples side by side in the very upper part. So also how it was important, no, the location of the places, no. So the highest and biggest building in the highest part of the town was a way to unaware understand that the gods and the emperor they were to obey, because the other temple was dedicated to the divinized Emperor Augustus. That was the first to start with this new system of government, not a republic anymore, as the time when Tarragona was founded, but the rule of one man along these different dynasties. First, the Julio Claudia, that was beginning with Julius Caesar, and then after the Julio Claudia came the dynasty of the Flavians. That was when Tarragona began this very monumentalization program, like an amphitheater, a circus, and so on. And the part that seems like more thick with buildings, it was when basically the people were living, working, the shops, and etc. Then important, a port, so the connection with Rome and with the other towns of the Roman Empire, the sea that was used to communicate between all the different provinces, nowadays North Africa, Near East, and the northern and west Mediterranean, and then the road coming from Gades at the Strait of Gibraltar, and then passing by Cartago was an important town, by the south of Valencia, then through Valentia, then through Tarraco, then even more at the south, so to our right. It was important also Barcelona, though not really important in the first stages of the Roman Empire, was a bit later, by 4th century, when it began to get some importance. And yeah, I said these two very clear differentiated parts of the town. Upper, representative, and for the enjoyment and for the public meetings, not only for fun in the circus, but in the central part there was a huge area portic with porticos at the three sides. That was for the annual meetings of mayors that came to Barcelona, and even for some important announcements that the governor and the high priest of the province, so called the high priest of the province, might have, and also the justice in buildings that later they became like the prototypes for the first churches. And then outside of this town, Tarragona nowadays, there is a handful of also these very interesting buildings, some of them World Heritage, like along the Via Augusta, there is a funerary monument called La Torre dels Escipions, the Tower of the Scipio, and then even more impressive, there is an aqueduct, a very well preserved aqueduct, and then some remains here, the drawer, some remains of villas that they were like the manufacturing, farming units of the Roman Empire. The Roman Empire was ruled by the cities, and the consume was done in the cities, but obviously the the culture of the olive tree for olive oil, of wine, or here for example was plantations of linen. That was the main products that they were trade with. Then here we are going to the upper part of Tarragona to see the cathedral and how along the centuries in this part, for example, here was this kind of big square, relatively empty, but very noble with statues, with galleries. Then at certain time they were appearing flats, and nowadays one of the loveliest, most cute little squares in Tarragona.